Tonight on CBC Vancouver News. BC pushes to get more people trained overseas working here.
It was like navigating through a maze for me.
Professionals across the board that need to be removed.
The province wants to streamline the accreditation process for dozens of professions. Plus, what led to the killing of a teenage boy in Kelowna?
I want people who know something to go to the police. I don't want social media gossip, and I don't want threats.
His mother hopes someone will come forward. And bike lanes off the table.
I don't want to get into the merits of bike lanes.
I also have heard from the public that they've had enough of separated bike lanes.
We should leave our options open.
Why one BC city has voted to not talk about them, let alone build them.
This is CBC Vancouver News.
Good evening, I'm Dan Burritt. Thanks for joining us. From architects to music teachers, veterinarians to social workers, the BC government says it wants to get more internationally trained professionals working here. As Emily Vance reports, it's rolling out legislation to help cut red tape for dozens of jobs.
We have 1 million plus jobs that will be opening in the next decade in this province.
Premier David Eby says the need for internationally trained professionals is growing.
And we know that we will not be successful in filling those jobs unless at least a third of them are filled by newcomers to British Columbia.
But right now, the process for getting foreign work credentials recognized can be lengthy and expensive. Groups that help newcomers in Canada say they hear many sad stories.
People are forced to make decisions of leaving the profession that they spent years in their home countries getting trained for and even working in those professions.
The International Credentials Recognition Act hopes to change that.
There are too many unnecessary barriers for internationally trained professionals across the board that need to be removed.
Mercier says the new act will remove what they call a catch-22, the need to have Canadian work experience before being accredited to work in BC. The act would also reduce what the province calls repetitive English language tests, set a limit on the amount of time it takes to get accredited, and require all information about each process be posted online. Alice Wong is a social worker trained in Hong Kong and living in Vancouver, and admits it was tough to get certified here in BC.
I was lucky that I have come through all the obstacles, that I'm going to start my first ever social worker job here.
Some business groups say they are cautiously optimistic.
Really, the proof is going to be in the results and how all of this new legislation, when it is approved by the BC government, is going to work in coordination with Canadian immigration policies.
If passed, the act would create a new superintendent to help coordinate with various regulatory bodies. The changes would take effect next summer. Emily Vance, CBC News, Victoria.
An explosion in Langley that destroyed a small building on Sunday afternoon has now prompted a homicide investigation. Liam Britton has more on the blast and what police found after.
We heard this huge bang that shook our house.
Rowena Dahlman and her husband were watching the news when the blast echoed through their South Langley neighborhood just after 2 p.m. Sunday. A small outbuilding about a kilometer away on 8th Avenue off to 40th was destroyed. Police say once firefighters put out the flames, they found human remains.
At this time, we're unable to say whether the person was deceased as a result of the explosion or if they were already deceased beforehand.
All along 8th Avenue, neighbors say doors and siding were wrecked by the blast. Next door to the explosion, workers have 9 windows to patch up. While just across this fence, chunks of metal, which homeowners say came from the destroyed outbuilding. This is the front of the property where the explosion happened. The outbuilding, however, that's further in, but police have kept us out. You can see that crews have been here all day. Police are looking for any kind of dash camera or surveillance camera footage from noon to 2:30 p.m. Sunday from this neighborhood. And they say they don't know yet if the victim lived on this property. Liam Britton, CBC News, Langley.
In Kelowna, the mother of a teenager killed this weekend is pleading for people to share what they know. Her son was hit by a car, and it's believed the crash was somehow connected to a bear spraying incident. Tanya Fletcher joins us now with more. Tanya, what more do we know?
Well, Dan, mystery really does surround what is now considered a homicide investigation, and it's really unclear how the events that unfolded are all connected. What we do know is that in the middle of the afternoon on Saturday, something happened involving a group of teens and that a number of people were bear sprayed. It was in the neighborhood of Rutland, and Kelowna RCMP were called to a park in that area around 4 p.m. While they were responding to the bear spraying incident, officers also received reports of a young man struck by a car nearby. He was rushed to the hospital in critical condition and later died. Investigators say evidence indicates that he was connected with the earlier bear spraying incident, but they won't reveal how. Today at the scene, a memorial is growing in memory of that teen. He has been identified by family and friends as 15-year-old Tristan Seeger. We spoke with a teen at the park this afternoon who says he was a close friend.
I known him for 3 years, but it felt like a lifetime.
Yeah.
He was 15, and he lived 3 lifetimes in the 15 years he was alive, but he should have lived way more lifetimes than that.
And Tanya, we've also spoken with the mother of the victim. What is she saying?
Well, Dan is the mom of a boy who was suddenly killed this way. She's obviously distraught. She says the reality of what happened on the weekend still seems surreal and that their family is taking it minute by minute for now. But ultimately, she wants rumors put to rest and the facts of what happened to come to light.
That I want this to be a really clean case. I don't want any retribution. I want people who know something to go to the police. I don't want social media gossip, and I don't want threats and bravado. Like, I want this person or people brought to justice, and I want it done the right way.
Now, as for that investigation, no arrests have been made, and the RCMP have not said whether they've identified a suspect. Dan?
Tanya Fletcher reporting for us tonight. Thank you, Tanya. Students from an elementary school that burned to the ground in Port Coquitlam have returned to class this morning. About 300 Hazel Trimbath Elementary School students are now being bused to Winslow Centre in nearby Coquitlam. It's a former high school and a district facility. Port Coquitlam's mayor says teachers have spent the past week preparing Winslow to make sure it feels comfortable for the students, but he admits it's only a temporary fix.
From my perspective, I want to see the school rebuilt, and I want to see it rebuilt as quickly as possible. And that's why in Port Coquitlam, we directed our staff to prioritize any application that comes to rebuild the school, and also to waive all the applicable city fees with rebuilding the school.
Hazel Trimbath was destroyed on October 14th in what authorities have called a suspicious fire. The mayor says police are reviewing hundreds of hours of surveillance footage. In the last few months, Vancouver has had several high-profile concerts canceled. Drake, Bruce Springsteen, Pink, and now Little Yachty on Saturday night. His concert was shut down after he told fans to go to the floor. Organizers say that created a fire and safety hazard.
Hey, come down here! Come over! It makes sense that it got canceled, but it also, like, when I was there, I didn't, like, feel like I was in danger, like, at all. Like, it didn't seem like, I know people, like broke some of the walls and stuff, but it didn't seem like it was like that bad. So everybody felt a bit like bummed out and disappointed.
Music journalist Kelsey Barnes from Exclaim magazine joined BC Today host Michelle Elliott to talk about why UBC and Live Nation might have felt they had to scrub the show out of an abundance of caution.
It makes me think of the Travis Scott Astroworld situation where people were pushing up to the front of the crowd where people died.
Yeah.
Live Nation, sorry, I forget the venue that this concert was at.
Thunderbird Stadium,
they don't want people dying. It's just not worth it.
The venue turned on the lights and tried to get people to go back to their seats. And while some did and the concert resumed, only to have the crowd rush the floor again. Many fans have taken to social media demanding their money back, and it's unclear if they'll get one. From the South Coast and beyond, bike lanes have become a divisive issue in some communities. Oftentimes, it leads to drawn-out debates that can roll on in City Council for years. But as Justin McElroy reports, one BC community decided on a unique solution.
Penticton. It has a giant peach, a giant welcome sign, and a giant ban at City Hall from work on one specific topic.
Bike lanes have not been good for our community.
They've had enough of separated bike lanes.
I don't want to get into the merits of bike lanes, to be honest.
That's right. Last week, Council voted to direct staff to stop all work on any separated bike lanes for the rest of their term in power.
It sounded like we were talking about bike lanes, but we weren't talking about bike lanes, but we're talking about bike lanes and how we shouldn't be talking about bike lanes going forward for another few years.
It comes 3 years after council approved the first major separated bike lane right through the heart of the city. Now, as with most things new, it has divided the town. And a councillor said the conversation has gotten a little over the top.
Obviously, the bike lanes are an unnecessarily emotional issue with a lot of people.
But he voted for the ban. So did 3 others, much to the chagrin of the mayor.
We should leave our options open for discussing projects in their entirety in the future. And that is our job.
Now, of course, there's nothing stopping this council from switching its mind in the future about talking about bike lanes. And while no discussion of any lanes might seem harsh, consider that Vancouver has had 5 votes in the last 3 years over a single bike lane, with no solution in sight. It's another example of how installing bike lanes anywhere in BC continues to be a bumpy road. Justin McElroy, CBC News, Vancouver.
Darius Madavi joins us now with a first look at the forecast. It is fall. You can feel it. A little chill. What do you think?
Almost winter, it feels like. It's freezing.
Can you give us a few more months?
No,
Okay.
That's all we get. It's not biking weather, that's for sure, especially...
Unless you're hardy. There are a lot of hardy people here at CBC.
You would need to be very hardy.
Yeah,
because
indeed.
We're talking 12 to 15 degrees below where it would usually be this time of year up north. Those temperatures sticking around for at least a week and spreading further south. Now, compare this to where we were the last few weeks, last month even. Up north, we were well above seasonal for a long time, consistently 5 to 10 degrees. So that's been a major drop. And last week, some places in the south, like Kamloops, broke temperature records for the day. And so compare that to where we are now, a little bit wild. Now, if we look here, these are the normal temperatures going back from 1940 to the last year. This is the average temperature in all these places, so a bit cooler than if we look at the Environment Canada data, but definitely warmer than where we are right now. So if we look over the next few days, temperatures coming down even more across the province, even here in the south. So Kamloops now going to hit close to 0, Kelowna hitting 1 degree. Absolutely massive change compared to last year. Here on the coast, it's not quite as bad, but we're definitely getting cooler than we have been. So enjoy this low where it's around 6, which is cold, but not as cold as it's going to be because we're getting to 0 by the end of this week.
Oh my. Okay, we'll keep in touch.
Sounds good.
Okay, thanks. Cities and towns across Canada are under pressure to change their bylaws to allow for more housing to be built. $4 billion is up for grabs through the Federal Housing Accelerator Fund. Ottawa is calling on communities to be ambitious with their pitches. But as Marina von Stackelberg reports, some cities want more flexibility.
Canada's Housing Minister Sean Fraser with a message for municipalities. If you want federal money to help you build more homes, get ambitious or get left behind.
We are looking for the best of the best. We are looking for the most ambitious applications.
Ottawa has received some 540 applications, but Fraser is suggesting cities alter their proposals to increase their chances of scoring the funds. He says municipalities should offer up their own land for development, speed up building permits, and loosen restrictions on the parking and land they require for housing.
If there's a message for communities that are partway through the process today, if you see your neighbor stepping up their ambition and getting a successful agreement with the federal government, know that that's who you're competing against.
Ottawa also wants cities to change zoning bylaws, so land designated for a single house can be used for multiple units. That's something Mississauga, Ontario recently voted to do.
I have no direction from my residents as to whether or not I should be voting in favor of fourplexes as of right.
But some councillors who voted against that worry in the rush to rezone and access the money, they haven't studied the impact on public services.
For the federal government to impose its housing standards on municipalities across this country and then just dangle a little bit of funding in front of us to get us to significantly overhaul our zoning bylaws in our cities, I think is very disingenuous by the federal government.
Other cities have a plan, but think Ottawa needs to be more flexible with its demands.
When the minister asked for 4 units per property, we just don't see that fits for Charlottetown because one method or one idea is not applicable to all. So as an historic city, we have to keep that historic look
I don't want to see the historic buildings in Charlottetown knocked over for small apartments, of course.
The federal government has reached funding deals with Halifax and several Ontario cities, including Hamilton, London, Vaughan, and Brampton. And in the coming few weeks, Ottawa plans to look at the applications from smaller municipalities and rural communities. Marina von Stackelberg, CBC News, Ottawa.
Here in BC, meanwhile, the province's new legislation introducing stricter rules around short-term rentals has some homeowners angry. But as Sarab Sandhu is finding out, it's also getting support from some unexpected places.
Brett Mason and Wyatt Dahl have been running an Airbnb unit in their Chemainus home since 2020.
Wyatt's originally from the States, so immigrated here and has a lot of family and friends in the States. And we wanted somewhere for them to be able to visit and stay for free. That's why we went with an Airbnb instead of a long-term rental.
After the initial success, the couple built another unit in their garden and listed it on the market last June.
Our tiny cabin, it's also my home office for work. So I work in it during the weekdays and then we just rent it out on weekends through Airbnb.
But all of that is set to change. On Monday, the BC government announced a new legislation which restricts short-term rentals to within a host's home or a basement suite or laneway home on the property where they live. Brett and Wyatt say they support the new rules.
I didn't think it was a bad thing. I don't think it's like the only solution. I feel like it's a start.
We need more affordable housing. But this is, a step.
Yeah, this is one step in that direction. Hopefully a step of many.
The province says the enforcement will be done through municipal and regional partners. And all short-term rentals will be required to share data with municipalities. But some advocates say the government needs to sharpen its strategy to get meaningful results.
Where the province can really succeed is going after the platforms themselves. Because you're playing whack-a-mole if you go after the hosts, right? But if you go after the platforms themselves, then enforcement becomes much easier.
The province says new rules are to target operators who rent out multiple units.
Maybe just take a moment and think about the bigger picture and like the greater good of housing some local community.
The province says new rules will come into effect in stages from now through late 2024. Saurabh Sandhu, CBC News, Vancouver.
BC's crackdown on short-term rentals follows places like New York and Montreal. Sarah Levitt breaks down why each of those cities took action and whether they can make a dent in the housing crisis.
The fire tore through the three-story, 15-unit building.
There were several people trapped.
There's a lot of anger over how this could happen.
7 people died in the blaze.
Many of them were staying in short-term Airbnb-style rental units, illegal in this part of the city.
The sad reality is that the kind of safety issues that were exposed with the fire here, these were also predictable issues. So there were kind of multiple failures of the rules that all led to this fire. It was a wake-up call.
It stands as a sober reminder since a fire ripped through it in March, killing 7. Now a symbol used by the Quebec government to crack down on illegal short-term rentals. Urban planner David Walksmith says it was due.
A lot of people who knew that the rules weren't being followed, that changes were necessary, still hadn't managed to kind of maybe prioritize the issue enough to get something done, and I think that started to change.
Since September, registering your rental is mandatory, and that registration number needs to be displayed in your ad. Platforms like Airbnb are also liable. They could face fines up to $100,000 per illegal unit.
It's pretty opaque, actually.
Michel Prue is skeptical of the rule changes. The housing advocate spends his days helping residents facing housing issues like eviction.
It seems like they put some stuff into place to show like they're doing something, but we're not sure how much they're actually doing something very effective to stop the short-term rental.
So this place people came to you because they were getting evicted?
Yeah.
Prue believes enforcement will be difficult. Trying to determine if the rules are being followed isn't easy, like at the building he's taking us to.
Yeah, right here.
Okay.
You can see the key box right there.
How is that a sign that this could potentially be Airbnb?
Usually when there's a key box, it's just that they're coming and going. The first apartment that got emptied, downstairs there was like 4 new appliances. Well, maybe it's because she wants to be nice to the new tenants afterwards, but then why a key box?
Short-term rentals over long-term housing. It's one of the contributing factors of the housing shortage, experts say, a crisis that's gripping other major cities in North America. New York City. We're here because a new law just came into effect limiting short-term rentals. It's being called the strictest in North America. If you want to rent a unit for 30 days or less, you have to follow some of these rules. First, you have to register with the city. You have to be physically present in the unit while it's being rented, and you can have a maximum of 2 guests at a time. The booking sites also have a responsibility to ensure that all their listings are legal. We're going to meet New York City Council member Carlina Rivera. She sponsored the bill that ultimately became law. Hi, Sarah.
Carlina.
Nice to meet you. You sponsored this bill 5 years ago. It's been a long road. Now it's law. Why was it important?
People who would come in with all sorts of housing inquiries and problems, and one of them was illegal hotels or illegal short-term rentals that were unsafe, that were contributing to the housing crisis.
New York has a severe housing crisis. Only 3% of apartments are vacant, and over half of the households can't afford housing. Behind the politicians and policymakers who turned this bill into law are community organizations and residents personally affected by short-term rentals, like the people who live in this building in Hell's Kitchen.
This is it. This is home for me. So we had this entire hallway collapse over here.
Chris LeBron has lived in this apartment since his childhood. About 5 years ago, an upstairs Airbnb flooded and caused a lot of damage. But that wasn't the biggest issue. You said it was hell, Airbnb hell. Why?
The residents of this building were put through the ringer. Half the apartments were used as illegal hotels for over half a decade. We didn't have a fire, but we had prostitution rings, we had a sex club, we had drug rings floating in and out.
So tell me how that kind of prompted you to move on to helping organize against these illegal hotels.
This is New York, and tenant harassment is real. So I had to go door to door to explain that I was going to be the one willing to sacrifice my person and my time, and I would do whatever I could to keep them safe. Excuse me.
Yeah, it's okay.
I gave up everything. I quit my full-time job, and I devoted myself to figuring out a solution. If I didn't have a home, if I didn't feel safe, what is my life really worth?
For many tenants like Chris, the new rules are a relief. But for some homeowners, it's a threat to a revenue stream they've relied on for years. What are you going to do now?
I mean, I moved to 30 days a few months ago and have had no bookings.
Gia Sharp and Marjane Moore Roberts both own homes in Brooklyn and are fearful of a long-term tenant agreement in a state with strong tenants' rights.
We're very, very fortunate to be able to own a home in New York City. That's my version of the American dream. But again, part of that decision and the privilege of doing that also came with the privilege of our autonomy.
You know, like everybody else, we're paying more for everything. We relied on that income to pay our mortgage and our expenses. Like, it's part of our budget, you know, so we're a little nervous.
As cities such as New York and Montreal search for solutions to their housing shortage, cracking down on short-term rentals may be just a part of the solution to a complex problem.
The sunlight is getting more scarce as we head into fall and winter. Do you get the seasonal blues? We're going to speak with an expert live on how to help yourself if you do after this. Thanks for joining us on our commercial-free live stream tonight. In Saskatchewan, today was the first day of school since that government passed its new Parents' Bill of Rights. Now, if a student asks a teacher to use a different gender-related name, the teacher must get permission from a parent or guardian first. The CBC's Pratush Dayal has more.
With the new law now in effect, school feels less safe to Silas Kane.
I am so hated for just existing and being who I am.
The 15-year-old came out as transgender 5 years ago to a teacher before he told his mother. She's sad other children won't have that opportunity.
I moved to Canada in 2007 from the UK, and this isn't what I thought I was moving to. I mean, this is really awful, scary.
Jessica Fraser and Meadow McLean both have transgender children in the school system.
There were several gender diverse kids, and the teachers were amazing.
They're upset by the new law, but feel confident some teachers will still find creative ways to support children. They just worry it won't be enough.
Supported in research that having one safe adult that you can discuss these things with saves lives and prevents suicide attempts and death by suicide. And so the fact that we're potentially taking that away is just an atrocity, really.
I'm going to quote Mr. Rogers, let's look for the helpers.
Dr. Sarah Dungewell is a Saskatoon psychiatrist. She says the public backlash to the law has been encouraging and that mental health professionals, when given the opportunity, will still support children.
We have not been in a well enough funded mental health support system in years, so we are all quite experienced with trying to make the best of a challenging situation. We're going to keep working on that.
Other mental health supports, well, we know there's not enough of that kind of thing in schools, just because the funding just isn't there. So, that's really not a realistic option.
How many more trans kids have to die before they realize that this isn't okay?
Pratish Dayal, CBC News, Saskatoon.
There is a live look at Tofino. Now, a month ago, we may be looking at a very visible, beautiful sunset, lots of colors in the sky, but with the end of the day earlier and earlier, the mood is changing. For some, it's less rage against the dying of the light and more trying to keep every day from feeling like the Sunday scaries. We're talking about seasonal depression. And here to help us figure out what we can do for our own mental health and that of our loved ones is registered psychologist from Upsilon Clinic, Jaleh Shaheen. Thanks very much for joining us today.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
So for some, this is it is an annual expector, the seasonal affective disorder. Do we know how many people experience it?
Yeah, so roughly there's an estimate about 10% of all depressions are seasonal affective disorder. There's some research that suggests about 15% of Canadians are typically affected with at least some mild to moderate form of it.
Are there specific populations or groups of people who are more at risk for developing or living with the symptoms of what we can call SAD?
Yes, so seasonal affective disorder typically is more diagnosed more often in women than men. And also, we've noticed that the younger adult population are at higher risk. If there's a family history of seasonal affective disorder or a different type of depression, that also increases the risk. And also for us living so far out of the equator, generally, the further you are up or south, north or south of the equator, we're also at higher risk for sure.
Is there a particular reason why women and younger people live with it more often?
There's some different theories about the causes, but at this time, we don't actually fully understand the causes for seasonal affective disorder and depression. There is some theories that suggest it is because of the effect on certain neurotransmitters in the brain, but we don't have a fully developed theory at the moment yet.
I want to ask about treatment in just a moment, but are there ways, first of all, to prevent seasonal affective disorder or at least reduce its recurrence?
Well, I would say that there's definitely a difference between kind of what we would refer to as the winter blues. That's a little bit shorter term, and a lot of us are affected by it. So we find that as the days are getting shorter and our habits and activities of daily life changes, we generally do see a lot more people kind of feeling down, and that usually lifts after a few days. Seasonal affective disorder is a form of depression, and so it's a clinical condition with a very specific set of symptoms that is shared with major depressive disorder. And so we really want to know, is the person's functioning being impaired? In terms of preventative strategies, we generally don't have any specific things that we can say, this for sure will prevent you from having seasonal affective disorder, but there are certainly things that help. So for example, general things that are really helpful for maintenance of overall mental health and wellness, like ensuring that there's as good as possible, you have good sleep hygiene and good sleep routine, that people are generally eating really well and nutritious meals, exercise and activity. Those are all certainly factors that can be helpful for sure.
Shalay Shaheen, registered psychologist from Upsilon Clinic, telling us about seasonal depression and ways to deal with it. Thank you very much for joining us tonight.
Thank you for having me.
As Israel intensifies its bombardment of Gaza here in Canada, the federal government sees growing calls to ask for a ceasefire. The latest on the war in the Middle East is coming up.
And her newborn baby. So I'm trying to conduct business in this setting.
When Leanne Stewart came to Grace Hospital in labor at 3 in the morning, this was the only space the hospital could find for her. So her daughter was born in this office.
It didn't make any difference at 3 o'clock this morning, but it is inconvenient now.
So now you're getting your own room?
Yeah.
This is not the first time mothers have given birth in Mary Shaw's public relations office, and it likely won't be the last. The number of babies being born at the Grace is growing. It's the busiest maternity hospital in Canada. And in the middle of this boom, more women in their mid to late 30s are having babies that are considered high risk and need special attention. That's causing a crunch, a dangerous crunch.
It has the potential to become unsafe. It has the potential for accidents to happen.
There was one point early this year where we had to ask the patients approximately 9 or 10 in the morning that were going home later in the day to get dressed and wait in the lounge areas so that we could transfer the patients from the post-anesthetic room in order to commence our surgical slate. Yes.
And that is not good.
Very dangerous obstetrical practice.
According to National Hospital safety standards, Grace should only handle 6,700 births a year. This year, 8,500 babies will be born here. Doctors have tried different ways to ease the load, such as discharging women a day earlier than they used to, or asking low-risk women to go elsewhere. But the numbers continue to climb.
There's no more flesh on the bones to tinker with, I think, is our problem. So we have to really reduce the numbers somehow.
Doctors say part of the problem is that the Grace is a victim of its own success. Pregnant women like it here. They don't want to go to other hospitals. But that may have to change. As one doctor said, an overcrowded hospital is an emergency waiting to happen. Catherine Clark, CBC News, Vancouver.
The International Committee of the Red Cross says 2 Israeli hostages have been released from captivity in Gaza. It says the 2 women are elderly and come from a kibbutz in southern Israel that was attacked by Hamas earlier this month. It came as Israel increased the number of airstrikes into Gaza. The CBC's Susan Ormiston explains.
Families flee in Gaza City after a bombardment demolishes a neighbor's house, they say, as the Israeli military intensify their airstrikes. Some of the most severe of this war. More than 300 strikes in 24 hours. Hamas-controlled health authorities say casualties are rapidly rising, over 5,000 killed in the war, including thousands of children. But the exact number is hard to verify. The last 24 hours was particularly deadly, it says, and pressure is growing internationally for a pause in this war.
It's very dire, and the only thing that we can do is to ask for a humanitarian pause and to increase the access of the humanitarian support.
But so far, no ceasefire. The Israeli military is zeroing in on Hamas operations, pounding targets to neuter threats, it says, before troops advance on the ground into Gaza. We spoke to Bilal Jad Allah in Gaza City.
Do you believe that there will be an Israeli ground incursion very soon?
For us here, or for Gaza people here, it's now safe. Because what he's doing from the sky is too much. He destroyed everything. So what is the need for the ground incursion? He destroyed everything in Gaza.
A third convoy of trucks carrying supplies got through to Gaza via the Rafah crossing in Egypt. Critical supplies of food and medicine, but no fuel needed to distribute those supplies, to desalinate the water, and critically to run hospital generators.
Without fuel, we are going to sadly be forced to stop our humanitarian operation in a couple of days on Wednesday night. So we really urge those who can help us to facilitate the delivery, an urgent delivery of fuel into the Gaza Strip.
Gaza is bracing for another deadly night, but tonight, 2 more hostages, both Israeli women, were freed by the militant group Hamas, it says for humanitarian reasons and because of poor health. But that leaves 220 other hostages still captive inside Gaza and will only ratchet up the pressure on Israeli and other governments to get them all out before an expected ground offensive. Susan Ormiston, CBC News, Jerusalem.
Now, while she is Israeli, Yocheved Lifshitz has Canadian ties, including a niece here in BC. Our Adrian Arsenault spoke with her about the moment she found out her aunt was finally free.
Ruti Mizrahi, you know, we have so little good news to talk about sometimes that it's a pleasure to talk with you tonight about your aunt. And I'm curious, what's the first indication you got that she was about to be freed?
I start getting messages suddenly, you know, and then I got a phone call from my ex-husband, and he said, "Did you hear the news?" And I'm like, "No." I couldn't believe it in the beginning, you know.
I can't imagine what went through you in that moment.
I'm not sure myself. It's like, it's such a relief and happiness, but then I don't really believe, you know. And, you know, there's so many other people that are still missing and kidnapped, that it's a mixed emotion, but very happy and relieved to see her back.
And of course, in terms of so many other people, your uncle is still being held. Do you know anything about how he is?
No, and what I heard is that they were actually separated, so they weren't together. So if that is the case, we won't probably even have anything new that we can learn from my aunt.
That's really hard. From talking to family and looking at the pictures, what's your sense of how your aunt is, or how she fared, or why they released her?
I don't really know why they released her. She looks good. Like, one of my thought was maybe because the women that they released so far, they all looked physically good, you know. So I guess the Hamas wants to show that, you know, they are very humanitarian. But other than this, I don't know.
Well, you're going to have a great chat with your aunt at one point. One last thought. How have you managed in the last 2 weeks?
You know, I had my ups and downs. It's like a roller coaster of emotions. I was really, you know, sad, mostly worried, also anger, you know, with everything that happened there. But I had to keep hope, you know, I had to keep positive and believe that they will come back hopefully soon.
Ruti, we really appreciate you taking time for us, and we hope the best for you and the whole family.
Thank you.
Canada has wrapped up its military flights leaving Israel, carrying people who want to get out of the region. And the Foreign Affairs Minister is still overseas working to help Canadians in the conflict zones. As Kate McKenna reports, here at home, the Liberal government is under pressure to call for a ceasefire.
With these trucks carrying aid into Gaza, Ottawa is still looking to get about 450 people out and to Canada. The Foreign Affairs Minister says there's still no firm commitment.
Evacuation of foreign nationals have not happened yet. And so we're in contact with many countries, including, of course, Israel, but also the US, Qatar, as negotiations are still happening.
Melanie Jolie is in the Middle East, talking to regional allies trying to stop conflict from spilling into the rest of the region.
I think it is important that together we work on a political dialogue to make sure that there is a horizon for peace and stability in the mid and longer term.
But she warns there is concern, especially on Israel's northern border.
For Canadians that are in Lebanon, it is time now to come home.
We are working in preparation and planning for what may be required of us.
The defense minister says the military is ready to help bring home Canadians from Lebanon if things get worse.
We're looking at every eventuality.
The situation in Gaza has grown dire.
NDP leader Jagmeet Singh asked for an urgent meeting with the Prime Minister, calling for an end to armed conflict.
Will the Prime Minister join the NDP's call for a ceasefire now?
We are doing everything that we can to support Canadians on the ground.
Canada's official position is that Israel has the right to defend itself in accordance with international law. The Foreign Affairs Minister was asked repeatedly about calls for a ceasefire, including some from her fellow Liberals. She showed no signs of Canada changing its position. Kate McKenna, CBC News, Ottawa.
A new report says Canada has 100,000 fewer entrepreneurs than it did 20 years ago. And that's despite our population growing by more than 10 million people over the same time. And as Philippe de Montigny found out, experts say that's not good for the country's economic health.
After James Lynn lost his job early in the pandemic, he launched Kalu, a pet food maker offering eco-friendly packaging. But with rising costs and stiff competition, scaling his business is no easy task.
It's like being in a maze where you know where you want to go, but you're not exactly sure how to get there, and there's a ton of pitfalls between where you are and where you want to go.
If 3 out of 1,000 Canadians became entrepreneurs 20 years ago, that's now dropped to just 1, according to a study from the Business Development Bank of Canada. Compared today to 2 decades ago, there are about 100,000 fewer entrepreneurs. BDC's chief economist says the strong labor market is partly to blame.
You have other choices. The job market is good, salary has been increasing. So that's another reason why we don't see as many Canadians becoming entrepreneurs.
And for those who do start a business, it's not easy. Nearly 1 in 3 startups shuts down within just 5 years. Yet these small businesses account for a lot of the innovation and job creation in this country.
It's going to be problematic because small businesses make up 98% of our economy, which is astounding.
The BDC study recommends fostering things like resilience, leadership, and people skills, and says those can be learned.
So where are they going to get those skills?
This entrepreneurship professor says these soft skills are not taught early enough.
You look at entrepreneurship now and it's a hot topic, but you don't find it in every elementary school. You don't find it in every high school.
Jobs at big companies.
The president of e-commerce giant Shopify says more can be done to show young people that entrepreneurship is a viable career path.
I also think the best way for us to do that is to role model, is to put more of a spotlight on all these incredibly successful companies here in Canada to show this is possible.
He hopes doing so will help turn those entrepreneurial dreams into thriving businesses. Philippe de Montigny, CBC News, Toronto.
Strutting their stuff on the dance floor, hoping for a chance to land a spot at the country's top dance school. We're going to meet the young hopefuls trying out for the National Ballet School after this.
I got a message on my phone saying that somebody was in my kitchen. I went on my camera to check, and there was a bear in my kitchen. He just walks over to the freezer like he's done it a million times, pulls the drawers open, and pulls a frozen lasagna out of the freezer and goes away. So my mother's lasagna is by far the best lasagna I've ever had. We started selling at our restaurant, to go, and I think that it's so good that even, the bears heard about it and they just had to break in and take some as well. When I got home, I called the cops and they almost didn't believe me. We definitely have a bear problem because the same bear that was here last Wednesday, she was back going to the same window to do the exact same thing just a couple of days later. There were so many things in that freezer, he could have taken anything, and he went straight for the lasagna that I really wanted. It was like he purposely walked in the house to get the frozen lasagna from our restaurant.
Hey, I'm Johanna Wagstaff.
And hi there, I'm Rohith Joseph.
And we're asking for 10 minutes of your day to go through the 10 things that the UN recommends we can all do when it comes to climate change.
Please don't leave.
No.
And also, the things aren't new.
We are just wired to not do them.
We promise you to help you figure out your brains, and you and your people can make better choices to combat climate change.
10 Minutes to Save the Planet is available now on CBC Listen and everywhere you get your podcasts.
Some of the best young ballet dancers in BC descended on Vancouver this weekend, taking the first leap towards a career on the world stage at Canada's National Ballet School auditions. Have a look.
We do a cross-country tour, an audition tour, looking for talent. Our main criteria is to see their passion and their joy of dance. And then we're looking, of course, for potential. We want to see them really strive and really enjoy the rigors of training to be a professional ballet dancer. It's really an Olympic caliber training to become a professional dancer. It's not an easy lifestyle, I'll admit that. Oh, it has to be a passion, but I wouldn't have traded it for anything.
There are some who look forward to the first snowfall of the season. For others, it's like a bandage you just rip off. Central Alberta is seeing the province's first significant snow today. This is Edmonton, where morning commuters were greeted by plenty of flurries. Calgary is preparing for much more, though, with up to 15 centimeters expected by tomorrow. City officials say they are ready, with crews already out de-icing bridges, roads, and intersections. And Darius Madavi, when it happens here in Metro Vancouver, the rest of the country will snicker loudly.
I'm sure they will. We actually are getting some snow in other places in BC, though, where maybe they're a little bit less wussy about it than we are. But you can see some of those flurries coming through places like Revelstoke already. That's only going to continue over the next few days, which is why Environment Canada has issued several special weather statements across the province. There's also a wind warning for Howe Sound. But here on the east coast of the island, this part here, you're looking at a rainfall warning, 30 to 50 millimeters as a system blows through. Going to be probably the only one that comes through this week, bringing plenty of precipitation to the coast. Nothing like last week, but a significant amount, and that should carry through and it should bring some snow actually to the North Shore Mountains, which we'll look at after. But here we're looking at snow for some of the mountain peaks, and throughout here the highway passes expecting to get, especially over here by Revelstoke, up to 20 centimeters of snow. So fairly significant amount over the next 24 to 48 hours. I also thought we should take a look at the lows. You can see that Arctic air moving further and further south, bringing us closer and closer to zero here in Vancouver. Abbotsford actually expected to drop below by Wednesday night. So some fairly chilly weather heading our way. You can see here that snow starting to build up over the next 24 hours. That's when most of it gets here. The next 48 hours after that, still a little bit, but not much more than what we've already seen. And then if we want to look at the rain accumulation as well, a fair amount for the coast coming. And then here you can see a lot of that snow also coming with rain at the same time. So quite a mix for some places in terms of what we're getting. Our lows tonight, still getting chilly. Again, a lot of snow possible even in the south. We're drying up a lot in the north, but they already did get quite a dump of snow over the weekend. Tomorrow our highs come up a bit, but again, very much flurries still possible even during the day because of how much chillier we are getting. And here, if we want to take a look at the North Shore Mountains, you can see that snow starting to build in over the next 36 hours. So even here in Vancouver, we're not quite escaping it. I know you can see here some of that accumulation looks like it's coming much further lower elevation than you'd expect. That's just the model being a little bit funny. But still expecting quite a bit of snow on those mountains. That rain tomorrow should be the end of it, and then we mostly dry up and get quite a bit sunnier for the rest of the week. So
and quite a bit cooler. Yes.
Definitely cooler.
Chris.
There's our zero.
Yes. Noted. Thanks, Darius.
Thanks, Dan.
Getting the lights ready for the season, a group of volunteers gathered to put up St. Paul's Lights of Hope. We're going to meet them next. Downtown Vancouver will soon get brighter, all to raise money for critical medical care. The annual St. Paul's Lights of Hope fundraising campaign has begun for its 26th year. The thousands of twinkling lights are put up by hundreds of volunteers. We spoke with one who's been helping out for more than 2 decades.
This is how I start my Christmas season. This is what puts me in the mood for Christmas.
What's happening behind us on Burrard Street at St. Paul's Hospital is incredible. It's a massive undertaking. It's the kickoff to the holiday season. We have hundreds of 100 volunteers or so from the construction industry.
I can confidently say that there's probably 60 to 80 of my closest friends and acquaintances here. They're the most amazing people I've had the opportunity to work with.
These are volunteers, and they come year after year because they have a personal connection to what is happening at the hospital.
Brings in a lot of donations for the hospital. It allows the hospital to get the professionals and the equipment that they so desperately need. I'd like to be able to get back. It's something that I've always done.
Just before we go, we have some breaking news to share with you. Vancouver fire crews say one person has died after a boat sank close to Wreck Beach earlier today. One man was found floating in the water. It's not yet clear what led to his death. Tanya Fletcher will have more for you tonight at 11 o'clock, right after the National. And of course, check our website for the latest, cbc.ca/BC. Good night.